ASUS's ROG, or Republic of Gamers Ally, made quite a few waves when it was introduced roughly about a year and a half ago, as it is one of the first, if not the first, handheld gaming computers. That comes with the added bonus of having factory-installed Windows 11. And I mean this literally. This is quite literally a gaming computer you can hold in your own hands. While some raved about this product and I was very tempted to get it for the longest time, I just couldn't make myself take the plunge until I saw it on sale in Best Buy for an excellent price. And so, finally, after hemming and hawing over it, I decided to take the plunge and get myself a Republic of Gamers Ally, specifically to start with at least, the entry-level model with the Z1, not the Extreme variation. I've owned this non-Extreme variant for a little bit over a year now, and here's a summary of how that year has gone. When I was very young, and when I got a bit older, I watched a cartoon series back in the day called The Centurions. The series, in addition to the 1980s-esque fashion, including the annoying V-neck vests, also took a 1980s perspective on the future, of course being set in the quote near future as the series opened, with computers and/or supercomputers playing a large role in everyone's lives. All this makes perfect sense with the time frame, as the first commercially available PC designed for the home, called the Apple II, was released in the very late 70s, it being followed with a whole rash of other computer companies building computers for the home and for personal use, something which years before was simply not possible, as computers were essentially the size of a house. Being made in the 80s meant it was subject to the education requirements of that era, which were becoming strongly enforced. This brings us to the subject of the infamous, or famous, depending upon your side of the argument, introduction of PSA or public service announcements at the end of every episode, of many of the cartoons made in the 80s, and 90s for that matter. One of these public service announcements really stimulated my mind and excited me, where one of the supporting characters, Crystal King, talked about new microcircuitry that would allow you to make supercomputers that you could, quote, carry in your pocket. Now, one could come to the conclusion that this was achieved with the introduction of the smartphone in the late 2000s, but I disagree. The smartphone is designed to be a communications device that can also browse the web and do some light computing tasks. It's not meant, for example, to do hardcore programming on, nor is it meant to do hardcore content creation. Although there is software to create videos and audio, etc., it's always stripped down from the full version that the desktop PC uses. And at the same time, while again the smartphone can play games, it can't play the same games one could play on, say, a desktop gaming computer. And while there have been portable gaming consoles such as the Game Boy starting in the late 80s, early 90s, Game Gear, Nintendo Switch, Nintendo DS, PlayStation Portable, etc., all of these had the same thing in common. They were designed to play their own games and weren't really computers themselves. The ROG Ally, on the other hand, is in fact a full-on Windows-supported portable gaming system, meaning it can run anything that Windows can run. And this is one of the items that attracted me to the ROG Ally, as I viewed several YouTube videos of people basically hooking a dock up to this device, enabling them to link it up to an actual TV set via HDMI, or a computer monitor. The system, because it supports Bluetooth, would also support a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, and with the use of a dock one, of course, could substitute a wired mouse or keyboard or wireless mouse and keyboard. And, effectively, once you've installed and or configured these add-ons, you have yourself essentially a portable computer. Again, much like that portable device that Crystal Kane in the Centurions episodes described. Still, I was somewhat hesitant to join the ROG Ally Club, if you will, as the entry level for this model at the point when it was introduced, again to be clear, the non-Extreme Z1 variant, was retailing for just under $600 or $599 to be precise. Not exactly cheap, especially when you consider that the Extreme Edition used to retail for just under $700 or $699 to be precise. There were also a rash of complaints ranging from problems with the joysticks not maintaining center positions, or drift as it's also referred to as well as the infamous failings of the micro SD card reader which is included with this device, this being further aggravated by the fact that ASUS's customer service, at least at that time, was going through a very bad phase, if you will. The micro SD card, interestingly enough, was apparently installed to help relieve the lack of capacity this device has, partly caused due to its compact SSD drive type, which ASUS apparently installed to save space, called the 2230. These particular drives tend to cost 50 to 100% more than the equivalent NVMe type SSD. For example, at the time I took delivery of this particular device, an upgrade to a 1TB version of this type of M.2/SSD drive would have cost in excess of $100. For the same price at the time, you could easily get 2 terabytes with the use of a standard full-size NVMe SSD. Something that the end user would clearly want to at least consider upgrading, as both of these units, the Extreme and the Non-Extreme, come with the standard 512 SSD of this type. 512 gigabytes is increasingly inadequate in this day and age of games whose installs are requiring in excess of 100 to even 200 gigabytes apiece. All these issues in mind kept me from essentially joining, as I said before, the ROG Ally Club. Then finally one day around Christmas time I was browsing Best Buy, where I happened to stumble upon a non-extreme Z1 variant of the ROG Ally, selling for just under $382, roughly half the price of what the model would have cost brand new. After hemming and hawing about it, and the fact I was so tempted and always wanted something like this to play games on, specifically my train simulator games like Train Sim World 4 and 2, not to mention Train Simulator Classic, and of course the very famous Forza Horizon 5, of which the ASUS Ally website actually stated would work, although it was kind of cagey as to how well it would perform. That and the previously mentioned PSA announcement on the Centurions that got me so excited so many years ago, I finally decided to take the plunge. In total, with all the taxes and everything else applied, the price came to just $412, a bit steeper than initially thought, but still noticeably cheaper than what this unit would have cost as brand new. I waited with bated breath for this open box unit to show up at my house, which it did somewhere around 4 or 5 days later. Again, this is an open boxed item, so it has to go through different channels than a new purchase would go through. Upon receiving it, I was very excited to see if this particular version of the ASUS Ally would actually run Forza Horizon 5, so I promptly began to start installing it, which meant activating and installing my Windows account on this device and making a few other adjustments. Unfortunately, I immediately began to run into a major problem, and that was with the Wi-Fi, which constantly cut out after the unit was put under a lot of strain, which of course, for those of you not aware, Forza Horizon 5's install is somewhere over 100 gigabytes, whereas something like 150, if I remember correctly, quite massive. The Wi-Fi would work fine for a time, but then suddenly cut out after a couple of minutes. It's not clear as to why it kept doing this, but it just kept doing it, even after I installed a new driver for the Wi-Fi card, which didn't seem to help anything. I began to seriously think that this is the reason why this model was returned as a, quote, open box item. It appeared, at least at that particular time, that the quality testing team or whoever Best Buy has looking at these items didn't do a very good job of testing this particular one. I was just about ready to throw this back in the box and send it back to Best Buy, as again I was well within the return policy for the item, but then I thought I had already installed my Windows account on the device, I'd already put a little bit of personal information there, I'd have to go back and delete all of it, and or do a full system reset, which would be extremely time consuming just to get it ready to return. Why not just try installing all the updates, firmware upgrades, etc. and see if that made a difference? Now this might sound crazy, but in my experience with computers and having a background in the IT industry, I found that sometimes installing software upgrades can actually fix hardware problems, in a very rare case. And it wasn't like this approach would actually cost me anything to attempt. And again, I'd already put my personal Microsoft account on this device for the sake of utilizing it as, again, a full-on gaming system so I could play Forza Horizon. I may as well go all the way and see if any of the updates, firmware upgrades, etc. fix it, as I'd heard there were quite a few of them. To get around the flaky/finicky Wi-Fi, I simply connected my Ally to a dock which I bought for it at the time, which had an Ethernet jack on it. This allowed me to simply connect it directly into my router and get a much more consistent, not to mention quicker, internet connection than the Wi-Fi would. Upon running Windows Update, I quickly discovered that there were like a bajillion updates that this thing needed to be quote-unquote up to date. So I decided to give it the old college/high school trial, hit the update button, and just see what happened. I did so just before heading to work at night so the system would not starve me for bandwidth during the day. To my relief and absolute delight, I found that this in fact did work, as outrageous and as ridiculously far-fetched as this sounds. Since all the firmware upgrades and other updates were done, the Wi-Fi knockwood has not cut out on me since. I was then able to log back in and finish the install of Forza Horizon 5, so I could finally start to play it, or at least I thought I'd be able to. Attempting to launch the game, I found it just wouldn't start, and this appeared to have been locked out by Microsoft, possibly to avoid tech support calls from users frustrated with the lack of performance from this particular game on their allies and other such lower performing devices. I was beginning to wonder if that somewhat questionable language used to describe the performance of the ROG Ally in Forza Horizon 5 was assuming that you owned an extreme version, not the non-extreme version. But I wasn't going to give up that easily, at least not just yet. In the meantime, I had other games I wanted to try, such as Mafia 3, which had been released a few years earlier and was now on Good Old Games, which I now owned it on. I promptly launched it, and that game did run, although the frame rate wasn't great, tapping out somewhere around 30 to 40 frames per second after I messed around with the settings, although a subsequent upgrade seems to have increased this again by a few more frames per second. Still not crazy, but the fact that this would run on a portable gaming console is pretty incredible. I then explored other games in my Good Old Games /GOG library, as apparently the company wants to be referred to now, such as classics like Street Racing Syndicate, Railroad Tycoon 2, and Men of War. Although strategy games can be hard to play with a controller, once you get used to it, it's actually not that bad. And again, because the ROG Ally has native Bluetooth support, even if you don't have a dock, you can always pair a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse with the device to get it to actually function like a desktop PC if you so wish. Most of these games, needless to say, ran very much better as they had far lower and demanding requirements, and one could easily make the case that this particular device, equipped with a non-extreme 6-core Z1 processor, is really meant for games that were a few years old at least. All that said, however, I still hadn't given up on installing Forza Horizon 5, and then thought of a way around this. A while back there was a bug in the game that was causing the Microsoft accounts to essentially not allow the game to load. I had gotten so frustrated with this I finally ended up buying a copy on Steam, as crazy as that sounds. Since the ROG Ally actually supports Steam natively with its own installed version, I figured this would be a great place to start in terms of trying to get this game up and running. Unfortunately, I found, interestingly enough, the then installed version of Steam would not activate and allow me to install games. I don't know what was wrong with it, it just wouldn't function. In the end, I wound up having to download a different version of Steam directly off the internet like I normally would with any install, and then run it that way. Upon getting this version of the Steam client installed, I was then finally able to download Horizon 5, and this time get it running with okay frame rates. Again, things have changed back and forth a little bit, but the frame rate wasn't anything to write home to mom about here. I got somewhere around 40 frames per second, bordering on 50, give or take a few, depending upon what mode I was in and what settings I had on the game specifically, and that's what most of the settings turned all the way down. Needless to say, these frame rates come nowhere near pushing the limit of the 120Hz refresh rate of the 7.7-inch screen that the ROG Ally comes equipped with. All of that said, however, it was still very playable, as we can see from this footage. And I believe that was in turbo mode. Now again, there have been firmware upgrades which have messed with this and increased it by a few frames per second, but also again, this is not the Extreme Edition, it's just the standard one, so you're going to have to make some sacrifices. Side note, the Z1 Extreme Edition with its 2 extra cores and 4 extra threads does make a noticeable improvement here. All that said though, it was great to be able to play the game on a portable console. That whole concept by itself made it very interesting. The performance, however, on this device is definitely an issue, especially for those who are more hardcore gamers than I am. While railroad games, which needless to say is one of the reasons why I'm making this video, as you probably guessed, such as Train Simulator Classic, which is essentially the original rail simulator, run very respectably with most settings at stock, I found newer but still outdated games such as Train Sim World 4 would require me to turn things like anti-aliasing off to get them to run at respectable frame rates. That said, once this was done, they ran very well, although with jagged lines. The advantage again of turning the settings down, as I should mention, even degrading the resolution thanks to the smaller screen, really aren't a big issue, as they just don't come out that much on a screen resolution of 1080p with a display size of only 7 inches. But for those of you hardcore pixel counters out there, you're going to be disappointed, as in the end turning the settings down in a game is going to reduce the graphical eye candy. But then again, let's not overlook the fact that again, this is a portable device that is capable of playing full-on PC games, even if the settings have to be reduced. Speaking of being able to play these full-on PC games on a handheld gaming system, ASUS did a great job of accommodating them, such as implementing software solutions like its Armory Crate. Some consider this bloatware and a few other things, but the fact of the matter is here it works perfectly. It gives you options in its most recent version as to how you want to set the console up before you launch a game. You literally click on the game it's detected in the system, or tap on it, or use the joystick to select it, and then it gives you various different options for controls during the game. Once you have determined and or have all your settings set to go for the gaming session you're about to engage in, you simply press Y, and the game will launch with those settings implemented. The joysticks and triggers work just the way you want them to. You don't have to fumble around. Again, this is dependent upon how closely integrated the software is with the console itself. Mainly Steam games I find work best here, although a few of the other games have provisions to function with Armory Crate. ASUS is still working on updating the software, much like the rest of the firmware, and it's my hope they will continue in this matter and continue to make this device more and more functional with more and more games, even older ones. But perhaps the true real party piece of this device is the fact that it is in fact a portable supercomputer, much like Crystal Kane said, that you can carry in your pocket. Well, of course you need a big pocket to fit this thing in, but still, it is in fact a full-on PC. Again, all one need do is buy a dock for this particular device, and there are plenty of them to choose from. Connect it to that dock and hook an HDMI cable up to it, and to a monitor or to a TV set. Attach a keyboard and mouse via Bluetooth or directly wired into the dock you have. And for further enhanced functionality, attach a full-on joystick or steering wheel via a USB port or Bluetooth, etc. And blammo, you have a full-on fledged PC. It is in this configuration, however, that we really start to see the limitations of the standard non-extreme processor come to light. You really feel the lack of those 2 cores as well as the 4 hyper-threads when running productivity software such as video editing software, or running games with higher detail settings as well as, again, higher resolutions. Despite this, however, this device is still very much functional as a productivity unit when hooked up to a keyboard, mouse, and TV set or monitor. With the introduction of so many of these type portable gaming devices that mainly are designed to run PC games, but portably, there has been a huge influx of docks available for them, with a wide variety of very much appreciated features, in addition to the obligatory Ethernet jack and extra USB ports. The current one I have has got plenty of features, including an SSD slot, which I currently have a 1TB drive in for extra storage capacity, partly dealing with the issue of the internal SSD. Speaking of the annoying issue with the expensive SSD upgrade this unit has available to it, there is a way around this. A few of the somewhat lower-end manufacturers, mainly from China it appears, have come up with a unique solution to this problem, allowing one to basically mount an M.2 mounting point that basically mounts into the standard SSD slot for the smaller SSD, but turns the actual mounting point around 30 degrees, allowing one to install a full-on NVMe SSD. I've done this upgrade to myself, and it's actually pretty easy to pull off and kind of fun, although there are a few quirks to it. It is also admittedly very gratifying when someone asks me what I've done to this device, and I can proudly boast that I have customized the unit with a full-on NVMe SSD. With all the positives, unfortunately, come negatives, and there are some to be noted. To start with, I have experienced the unfortunate problem with the drifting on the joysticks, with the cursor seemingly moving by itself. It only happens in very rare circumstances, and not enough in my opinion to send it back, because again, I don't want to pay to have this thing returned to me with the same problem continuing to exist. I have also, unfortunately, in more recent times, experienced the problem with the microSD card slot failing. Most of my research indicates this is due to the placement of the microSD slot near the cooling system, which essentially puts it right in the line of a lot of hot air being drawn up from the CPU, which essentially overheats the slot itself, causing it to fail. The only way to fix this and the joystick issues is again to RMA it, as they are part of the board. However, the most recent variant of the Ally, as of the making of this film, which is the Ally X, has gotten around this problem by putting the joysticks on separate daughter boards, allowing them to be very easily swapped out, and the joysticks themselves have had improved designs implemented on them. And the microSD card slot has been moved to a different location, so it is not in the draft area by the cooling system. So here's some final thoughts with this device after a year of living with it. Do I like it? Well, of course I do. It's fun to play with. And yes, of course, it's a little bit underpowered for what it is. I solved that by getting the Extreme Edition. Let me know and I'll make a video review on that particular model, which is noticeably more powerful. Another more important question, and I think is the more direct one, is this device good for you? Will it handle your needs? And that's going to basically be up to you. What I would say is if you're a hardcore gamer and you really have to have the highest settings, you're going to have to think twice about getting the standard version of the Ally, as it doesn't have the Extreme Series processor. While the differences in some games are more minimal, the majority of games will benefit much more from the Extreme Series. And as of the making of this review/video, there's a new kit in town, the ROG Ally X, with, again, the upgraded daughter boards for the joysticks, as well as the upgraded and improved slot for the microSD card, as well as the Ally X coming with an additional USB-C port for a total of 2, and, get this, 24 gigs of RAM, amongst a few other improvements. While some may scoff at the extra 8 gigs being added to this particular device as simply a marketing campaign / gimmick, the fact of the matter is it has a real purpose here, as both the standard Z1 and Z1 Extreme in this case are in fact APUs, meaning in addition to data processors, these devices also function as graphics processors. And because they share the same RAM, even the addition of an extra 8 gigs is going to make a huge noticeable improvement. And thus, while many might give a resounding big deal when they hear about the extra 8 gigs, this appears to make a huge difference. As I've heard from reviewers, that does make a noticeable difference on more demanding games that require more memory to process data, especially for the graphics side of the equation. Bottom line, if you've become in more recent times, like I am, Sob, a more casual gamer, just looking to dip your toes into the handheld market, not willing to pay the extra for the Extreme or the Ally X Extreme, this could be the bargain of the century, with prices for the entry-level Ally now down to $349, brand new. Not remanufactured, not open box, but brand new, $349. You really can't beat that for that price, especially considering how capable this device is. Bottom line, if you're looking for an inexpensive portable handheld Windows device that can also play games, this is the system for you. If not, look toward the ROG X. And that's going to do it for the ROG Ally review. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Please like and subscribe. And as always, keep them... keep the joystick side up.